It's a Maamar from Shabbos Parshas Vigash Hey Tevis Tovshin Mem Ches. There's actually going to be like two halves to this Maamar. One is going to talk about one topic in this week's Parsha. The other half of the Maamar is going to talk about another topic in this Parsha. So first, the first topic. The first topic is going to be about the approach of Yehuda and Yosef, which shows on a union between the two. And the Rebbe is going to explore what is that union about. What is the concept of joining between Yehuda and Yosef? What does that accomplish? What's the purpose? What's the idea? Beruchnis ha'inyan. By Yigash Elav Yehuda, Yehuda approached him, meaning approached Yosef. The content of the topic over here is Yehuda approaching Yosef, which spiritually indicates the Hainu Yichud Yehuda v'Yosef. It's a union of Yehuda and Yosef. And similar to this, and the Haftarah of the Parsha, Misuper, it relates, it tells about a nevuah that talks about the times of Mashiach, because Yechezkel was being told nevuahs about Mashiach's times, and even though after the passing of Shlomo HaMelech, the kingdoms of Yisrael was divided into two kingdoms, the kingdom of Yehuda, which was the Shevet Yehuda and Binyamin, and the kingdom of Yosef, Ephraim, which was the most of the kings came from Shevet Ephraim, that's part of Yosef, the 10 kings. So the nevuah of Yechezkel uses physical things to manifest the idea of the union between them. So Mesupr shall also love Yushneitz. It relates that in the future when Mashiach comes, Yechezkel Hanavi was told that it's going to be two pieces of wood that he writes on them the name Yehuda and the name Ephraim. Eitz Yehuda ve'etz Ephraim. And then miraculously these two pieces of wood will join, indicating the joining of the two kingdoms of Malchi Yisrael and Malchi Yehuda. And there's going to be one king only. Instead of two kings, one for Aser Sashvatim, one for Yehuda, it's going to be only one king, Shehu David. Like it says, David Melech Aleim, my servant David will be a king over them. David, and David, my servant, will be a leader over them forever. Now, we are comparing Yehuda and Yosef's union at the beginning of our parsha with Yehuda and Ephraim in the Haftarah. So the Rebbe is right way can explain that Ephraim and Yosef are really the same thing. So he says in line 7, the Ephraim, the Iker Shifta Shel Yosef, Ephraim is the primary Shevet of Yosef, like it says concerning Ephraim, that when Yaakov Avinu was giving a bracha to Yosef's children of Ephraim and Menashe, though Menashe was the older one of the two, Yaakov put his right hand on Ephraim's head, and he explained, and he said, "V'ulam achiv hakoten yigdol imenu." Yet his younger brother, the younger brother of the two, Ephraim, will be greater than him. And we actually see this not just in the fact that in the kingdoms later on, that the kings of Malchi Yisrael were primarily from Shevet Ephraim to such a degree that we call the entire Aser Sashvatim by the name of Ephraim. We even have it in davening. We bring it down in Rosh Hashanah davening. Haben Yaker li Ephraim. My child is precious to me. Ephraim is going on the Klal Yisrael that's also called by the name Ephraim, especially because the Aser Sashvatim had to do with Ephraim. And not only then, not only during the time of Aser Sashvatim, not only indicated by the two pieces of wood of Mashiach's times, but also even while they were still in the Midbar, there were 4 camps. In each one of the camps there were 3 Shvatim. And then there was the head of each camp. Yehuda was the head of one camp, Reuven was the head of another camp, there was the Don was the head of one camp, and Ephraim was the head of a camp that had Nit Menashe as well. Ephraim is younger. Still in all, he was the head of the camp. So he says inside, line 9, he was the head of the flag. In other words, the whole encampment had a flag. Shekol Shevet Menashe, that included in his camp In Degel Machan Ephraim, it included Shevet Menashe, like it says, Va'olav and upon him, meaning part of his camp was Mata Menashe, was the Shevet Menashe. So we see that Ephraim took the place of Yosef. He was the head over the two Shvatim that came out of Yosef. With David Shevet Yehuda, and David is from Shevet Yehuda. So therefore, essentially what he's saying is the Haftorah's union and the beginning of our Parsha's union mirror each other, they correspond to each other. Nimtza comes out Shetoich and Haftorah, Ugamkin Achibur Va'ichud the Yosef Yehuda, that the content of the Haftorah is also the joining and the union of Yosef and Yehuda, Sheshneim Yiu Tachas Melech Echad, that both of them will be under one king. So now the Rebbe wants to explore what does this mean spiritually. How do I know that it has to have a spiritual meaning? Because everything in Torah is everlasting. Since everything in Torah is everlasting, so even in a time when we don't have kings, and even in a time when there's no Aseret Hashvatim, there's still this union between the two. He says in line 13, the Torah is everlasting. Moving for this is understood. In this topic, there's an everlasting directive and lesson to every single man and woman amongst the Yidden. The Gamma Sipur ala Dvar Hasid Lias, Hasid Lavi, also the story about what's going to be in the future. In the future times, when Nitzchi is everlasting, V'shayach Gamma Achshav is applicable also now. One might say, it's talking about Mashiach's times. It's talking about Mashiach's times, it has nothing to do with me. But since it's part of Torah, and Torah is a Hayrah, so since it's a Hayrah, it's a lesson, that's an everlasting lesson to teach me now as well. And if even something that hasn't yet occurred, that's going to occur when Mashiach comes as a lesson for me, how much more so matters that we're already in the past. Hagoshas Yosef Yehuda that we have in this week's parsha, but Yosef, that Yosef was approached by Yehuda, for sure, that since it already occurred, for sure has a lesson for us, what we learn from this. Since the Torah was given as a directive and a lesson for the Yidden, like it says in the Torah, Tzav is Bnei Yisrael, command the Bnei Yisrael, Dabar Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Bnei Yisrael, moving it's understood, that its primary thing is a lesson to every single Yid, and also the lesson and the directive is also in the primary matter of what every single Yid is about. What's the primary matter of every single Yid? The fact that I was created to serve my Maker. In other words, there are certain lessons that we could say is a lesson for secondary things. For example, Mefarshim bring down that the way Yaakov acted with Esav, he prepared for war and he sent him a gift and he davened, is a lesson for us throughout time how to interact with those that are trying to fight us, and etc., etc. But that's not like the core idea of a Yid. The core idea of a Yid is serving his Maker. So the Rebbe says that the lesson that Torah imparts to us is not just on some side thing, but the lesson that the Torah teaches us is in something that's the core idea of the Yid. And what's the core idea of a Yid? That the very essence of a Yid was, Ani loy nivreisi el l'sham sheskoini. I was not created only to serve my Maker. That is the primary aspect of a Yid, and therefore the lesson that we derive of the union between Yosef and Yehuda, both at the beginning of our parsha and in the Haftorah, is something that teaches us a lesson in our service of Hashem. So the Rebbe is first going to say that this represents the two aspects of a Yid service in Torah study and doing actions of mitzvahs. He's going to explain Yosef shows on Torah study, Yehuda shows on the actions of mitzvahs, and these should not be just two separate lines in our life. We have our learning and we have our action, but actually each one must influence and must be mashpia on the others. Here the Indian explanation this matter is saying like explained in the Maamar of the Rabbeim and our Parsha Yehuda v'Yosef and Beis and Yon the Talmud the Limud the Mais. Yehuda and Yosef represent the two ideas of Torah study and action and Maisa mitzvahs. Torah versus mitzvahs. The Gemara brings down a dispute. I Talmud Gadol or Maisa Gadol? Is Torah study greater or is action, the Maisa of the mitzvahs, greater? The Yehuda Gover Be'echov, it says that Yehuda overpowered his brothers. Vuhu Amelech, he's the idea of a king. Sheikir Inyani, who lifts a Echia Maisa Poil. What does a king do? A king tells us what to do. That's Maisa. It's not about study. A king is not there to explain to us anything. He's here to command us, to tell us what to do. That's also what David is about, because David is called my servant David. Why is it specifically used the term servant? The Inyan ha'avdus shaykh l'maisa poel dafka, servitude is connected specifically with action. So Yehuda represents maisa, action, mitzvahs. Yosef in Yonahu Talmud, and Yosef's idea, the concept of Yosef is Torah study. The idea of Torah study is in a way of increasing. One needs to add. Every single person and every single generation adds more volumes and more volumes in Torah. That he increases through the study with understanding and comprehension. That is hinted in the word Yosef. Yosef is in the word increase. So that shows on Torah study, which is about increase. So too, that's the idea of Ephraim. Because Ephraim is from the expression, he made me fruitful. Fruitful meaning giving more, bearing fruit. Increase and addition. So that is what Yehuda and Yosef represent. When we say about the union between them, that means they have to influence and impact each other. The ultimate purpose is both of them should be united. There should be the effect of this Torah study and action. There should be the effect and influence and impact of action on Torah study. And now he's going to explain how they impact each other. The effect of action in Torah study is understood according to what's explained in the Hemshech Maamar of the Rebbe Rashab, known as very well known Hemshech called Hemshech Tafri Samach Vav of the year 1906. When someone studies Torah in such a way that he knows that the actual ruling in halacha in actuality is dependent upon his Torah study. Many people study, but it has no practical application. They are studying it theoretically. They may study Gemara, they may study Chumash, they may study Mefarshim, they may study Chassidus, but none of it is because he needs to practically know how to put it into action. So then, that's one level of study. But when a person studies these things because they need to know how to act based on that, so the type of study, the depth of the study, the clarity of the study is of a totally different type. It says in line 22, then he completely sublimates his own feelings and his own desires, etc. He's totally focused on what is the true halacha over here. Because he knows that this matters for action. How should he do the mitzvah? So that is the idea of the impact that action has on the study. That when a person is studying, because they know that based on the study they're now going to have to decide how to act, so therefore the type of study is of a different quality totally. Now he's going to talk about the other way, the impact of study on action. Line 23, similar to this. On the other hand, a Talmud poel b'maisa, study affects action. So there's the obvious type of study that affects action. To be able to know what to do, I got to open up a sefer, I got to see what the halach is. Vainu loirak mashet tzarich lis yedias halachas almanas leidas amaisa sheyasim be'el shalois. Not only that he has to have the knowledge of the halachas, so he should know the actions that he should do, and these are that he shouldn't do. But that is a very simple and obvious impact that the study has on action. If he studies, that he knows what to do. But also, there has to be not just studying the dry halakha, the dry dinim, but he also has to know the idea of study with understanding and comprehension, in a way, like we said before, to increase in it. It's impossible to rule when it comes halacha l'maisa, where it's not a clear and open halacha in Shulchan Aruch. So it's impossible to derive, let's say, one halacha from another halacha, believe leida prote the time halachas, without knowing the details and the reasons of the halachas kedisa b'rishonim, like it's brought down in the rishonim. In other words, for a Rav, for example, to be able to rule on halacha, it's not just enough that he studied the entire Shulchan Aruch. He needs to go back to know the sources, and he needs to realize how did the Shulchan Aruch come to these conclusions, and he needs to know, what the sources in the Gemara, and then going on further in the commentaries on the Gemara, and the Rishonim and the Achronim. And when he realizes the whole thought process of all this, how we reached a certain halacha, based on this, he could decide, well, based on this idea, even though, let's say, Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about electricity, but since I know about the development of certain other halachas, let's say, in Shabbos, so I can derive from that and extrapolate from that, because I know the Gemara's approach and the Rishonim's approach and the Shulchan Aruch's approach. And so too, this is how many modern shilas, and it's not just modern shilas, but throughout history there was always shilas and questions that weren't clearly addressed in the Sfarim beforehand, but only by studying the core understanding of the halacha as it's brought down the Gemara and the Mishnah and so on, were the poskim of that generation able to reach a conclusion. So this is the way Talmud impacts Maisa. And that's what it means, Yosef and Yehuda approaching each other, and David and Ephraim approaching each other, the union between how action influences the learning, how learning influences the action. That's one component of Yosef and Yehuda's joining. Now, still in the topic of Yosef and Yehuda's joining, he's not talking about a new topic, that's going to be next. In the joining between Yosef and Yehuda, there's another component. And that is what's called Geula and Tefillah. In other words, putting aside learning and action, now a totally new topic that Yosef and Yehuda represent. Line 3, according to this explanation, the idea of action is something outside of the person. So there's Torah study, which is internal, there's action that's external, and there has to be a union between them. Now the Rebbe is going to say that Yosef and Yehuda also represent a union of something internal within me. But more specifically, there's both components in the person himself, that you have the union of Yosef and Yehuda. In a person's service of davening, which is an internal service. So in his service of davening, there are two aspects. There's the Yosef aspect, and there is the Yehuda aspect, which is known. The Zohar says, Smichas Geula L'Tfilah. The Zohar says, from where it says, Vayigash Elav Yehuda, from this we learn and derive that a person cannot make an interruption between the bracha Baruch Ato Hashem Gal Yisrael and Shemoneh Esrei, the Amidah that's recited afterwards. We're not even supposed to recite Amen. To such a degree do we have to have the closeness, the bringing together of Geula, Gal, and Tefillah, which is going on Shemoneh Esrei. And this is representative of Yosef and Yehuda, or represented by Yosef and Yehuda. Line 6, in Yosef Yehuda, the joining and the non-interruption between Gal Yisrael and Shemoneh Esrei is the idea of Yosef and Yehuda. There's the idea of davening, part of davening, what Chazal called tefillah, which we call Shemoneh Esrei or Tefillas Hamidah, the davening of the standing. The tefillah of Shemoneh Esrei is, even though Shema is, let's say, a very important davening, but it's not really part of davening like we've spoken about. It's a separate mitzvah of Kriyas Shema. Tefillah is the ultimate state of bittul. We're standing like a servant before our master. We're not supposed to move, etc., etc. Yehuda. That's the idea of Yehuda. Why does Yehuda represent Shemoneh Esrei and the idea of bittul? Like it says about Yehuda, now I will praise Hashem. Leah said when Yehuda was born, now I will praise Hashem. And she stopped, she stood still from giving birth. So we see a very interesting thing. Tamoid reminds us of Tfilas Hamida, standing, bittul. Through the idea of admitting, oide, which he said, I praise, and it also means admitting, which shows on bittul. Boim lamido bittul vatamid. We come to the standing of bittul, standing still. So that is, Yehuda has to do with Shemoneh Esrei, has to do with Tfilas Hamida, Hapam oides Hashem, Yehuda from the word oide, and then vatamid. Then we reach a state of bittul. Prior to the level of Yehuda, the level of Amida and Bittul, Yeshna Inyan HaGeula. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Goal Yisrael. There's the idea of the redemption. She's a Shayich Li Yosef Vayisaf. The redemption is connected with Yosef and increase and addition. What does it have to do, increase and addition, with Geula, with the redemption? Tari Geula Hi Inyan Shal Geula is an increase. It's an addition over everything. All the spirituality that we have in this world now is going to be increased to an infinite degree. So it's going to increase, and also the physical goodness is going to increase. It's all about increase when the Geula comes. And befrat, and especially so, from the part of Shalom Nafshi Mikrovli, when the Geula is in such a way that he redeems in peace my soul from those that battle to me. The Rebbe always speaks Maamarim on this pasuk in connection with Yutas Kislev and Yud Kislev, because redemption and peace means that there's no need for fighting. She'ein metzias shel grav. There's no idea of a battle. There's no existence of a battle. Ela guli b'sholem, but the redemption is in a way of a peaceable manner. So for sure, when the redemption is in a peaceable manner, so then it's something that's an increase way beyond before, because before there was a potential for battle. Now there's not even a potential for battle. That's the closeness and the bringing together of Geula to davening. The Hainu Yichud V'Chibur Yehuda V'Yosef, the union and the joining of Yehuda V'Yosef. Shabeza and Yonim, the Talmud of Ma'aseh Geula V'Tfilah. Both of the topics we spoke about, both in the previous paragraph and this paragraph, that we have learning, which is represented by Yosef, and action, which is represented by Yehuda, or Geula, redemption, which is represented by Yosef, and Tefillah, which is represented by Yehuda, and Smuchim Zalazah are close to each other, and Mesachdim Yachad, and they become joined together. And that is also the union that will be when Mashiach comes. David Abdi Naslam Loilon, say David, my servant, will be a leader over them forever, because there will be the union of Yehuda and Yosef. End of one topic. Now we're going to begin a totally different topic. Now he's going to discuss about what was the entire effect that Yehuda had on Yosef, that Yosef couldn't control himself and he burst out crying, and this came about by Yehuda's relating what he did to Yosef. And that's what he's going to explore now, not focused on this union issue. That was one thing. Line 21, last paragraph on the page. We still need to understand the general content of the story, of the approach of Yehuda to Yosef, because of Kol Divrei Yehuda li Yosef. It's related in the pasuk, all the words of Yehuda to Yosef. She'amar Loi, that Yehuda told Yosef, let your servant please speak a matter in the ears of your master. What does it mean in the ears of your master? Pirish Rashi explains, Yikonsu dvarai b'oznecha, my words should enter your ears. That's what he was requesting, that this whole story that I'm about to relate to you, that he went through the entire thing of their visit to Mitzrayim, what Yosef treated them, and everything that happened, let this enter your ears. And afterwards, after Yehuda put that request before Yosef, that all of this should enter Yosef's ears, so then he related all the detailed stories that occurred with them until this occurred. In other words, everything that happened over there with the Shvatim and so on. And seemingly, Madua Herich, why did he go at length? Why did the Pasuk go into length in all the details of the matter? The Pasuk could have just said in short that Yehuda just repeated and reviewed all the events that occurred. He had to go into every single detail what Yehuda repeated, similar to what Chassidus often speaks about, the Maamar Chazal about Eliezer, that Eliezer first relates the entire story, how Eliezer went and found Rivka, and then afterwards it tells again how Eliezer told over the story to Besuel and Lavan. In a similar vein, the Rebbe says, what need is there for the Pasuk to repeat the entire story the way Yehuda said? Another question, he says, in addition to this, we need to understand the Lachri Divri Yehuda Ksiv, after the words of Yehuda, it says, that Yosef cannot control himself. This seems to indicate this was a result because of the way Yehuda related the entire story, so that's why Yosef couldn't control himself and he burst out crying. Seemingly, the majority of what Yosef related, what Yehuda related to Yosef, Yosef knew already. In the majority of what he said, he's just repeating what was said before, what occurred earlier, which Yosef was a party to most of those events. If so, how did this cause such a great change in Yosef that Yosef couldn't control himself? If Yehuda would have shared with Yosef some amazing and new revelations about the situation, that would have maybe impacted Yosef, and he would have I can't hold myself back. But all Yehuda was doing was more or less repeating all the events that Yosef was aware of. So why did he feel that he couldn't control himself anymore? Second paragraph. The idea behind this is for Baruch B'Teres Chaim. Parsha saying, let's explain the length in the Teres Chaim. That's from the Mitler Rebbe on our Parsha. That the novelty and uniqueness of the words of Yehuda spiritually accomplished the following: by repeating the events, Yehuda elevated these events and brought events to a higher level. Dvar, through the words of Yehuda, by relating the story, he elevated all the matters that he spoke about them to his level. He affected a refinement in all of these details of what took place. He elevated them to their root and to their source. So he's going to give an example. Yehuda mentioned, or at least what was pointing towards in his words about the sale of Yosef. Externally, that was a negative thing. Until such a degree that that it affected the descent, even of Yehuda himself. That event of selling Yosef caused Yehuda to descend. Like it says in Parshas Vayeshev, Vayered Yehuda Gomer. Yehuda descended. When told the whole story about Yehuda and Tamar, it says Yehuda descended. So one of the explanations of why it says Yehuda descended, Rashi explains, Shahiriduhu Migdulasai. In general, Yehuda was considered even then like a king and more respected than all the other Shvatim. But the rest of the Shvatim lowered him at that time from his greatness. Kitanu, because the Shvatim placed the following complaint to him, that he was the one that was really guilty in Yosef's sale, because he didn't protest. So, externally was something negative. Now when Yehuda related the entire story, he elevated it to its source. He elevated the sparks from the negative place to a positive place. Amram, line 19, through Yehuda speaking about these topics, he elevated them to their root and their source. That over there, in the root and source, they are elevated and high, lofty things. So then, only after, and as a result of that, was revealed that the sale of Yosef was something very high. Up till then, they were very upset that Yosef was sold. They regretted it terribly. But once Yehuda elevated it, he brought out and revealed how the negative was only a shell that contained in it the positive. Like we always talk about, everything that negative that happens really in truth is positive. And in that case, it was actually revealed to them. Line 22, like Yosef said, that the Eibishter sent me as a sustenance to give you life. He made me an important person before Pari. So instead of it being negative, we showed how Gamzul Toiva or the Kol Ma'adav Rachman Latava, but it's really positive. But that was only a result of Yehuda repeating it. Only Yehuda, because of the level of his bittul, he was able to affect the revelation of this goodness of the event, the goodness event in Yosef. Because Yehuda elevated it and revealed now in Yosef a new perspective and a new way of looking at all of this. So therefore, he affected in Yosef that now Yosef cannot control himself. And by Yosef there was the idea of crying. It came as a result of the over and the excess of moichin, of intellect. What does that mean? It's a result of such a revelation that the brain cannot handle it. What is the idea of crying? Chassidus always says that whenever we have too much of something, whether it's in the negative or in the positive, and we cannot contain it inside, so we burst into tears. And it has to do also how broad-minded we are. A child is more likely to burst into tears than an adult, because a child's mind is very limited, and therefore any emotional thing can overwhelm him and he bursts into tears. But be that as it may, crying indicates receiving something that is beyond him. So the same thing, Yosef burst into tears because of this elevation and revelation that Yehuda with his bittul made in Yosef, and he brought about in Yosef to see and look at the events in a totally different way, and it blew his mind, to use the expression, and he burst into tears, and therefore he couldn't control himself. That's the novelty, that even Yosef was not able to control himself. What's the uniqueness about it? As he's about to explain, Yosef is known to be greater than the Shvatim and even the Avos. Though in general Yosef is higher than the forefathers and the Shvatim, like it's known the explanation of this. That the forefathers and the Shvatim were shepherds. Why? Because by being a shepherd, they could be alone and removed from the world. They didn't have to engage with the world and deal with the world. King Yosef as opposed to Yosef, he had the capability to cleave in godliness, and Hashem's very essence. Gambi Yosef, Mishnah L'Malch Mitzrayim, even while being the viceroy to the king of Egypt. Like it's brought down the Medrash on what Yaakov Avinu said. Rav, much, Oid Yosef Nichai. Yosef, my son, is still alive. What's the meaning of the word Rav? The different Farshim explain different things. Rashi explains what the Rav means. The Medrash says Rav, he is great, he is higher. Shu tzadik harbe Yosef memenu. That Yosef is even, Yaakov said that Yosef is even a greater tzaddik than Yaakov. That's because of the advantage and quality of Yosef over Yaakov. So despite the fact that even Yaakov recognized how much greater Yosef was, that Yosef could be involved in Mitzrayim and still not be affected by it and still be cleaving to Hashem, Va'afal Pikein is still in all, after the words of Yehuda, in a way that Yehuda approached him, the ultimate bittul, like we said before. This bittul that Yehuda had affected such a great revelation of light. It was even higher than the level of Yosef. Until Yosef could not control himself. Even though I said it's a separate topic than what we spoke about before, it's still about the influence of Yehuda and Yosef. Like we had the influence of Talmud and Maisa and Talmud, and Gula and Tefillah have to be joined. The bittul of Yehuda influenced Yosef and brought down such a great revelation that it was too much for Yosef to handle, and therefore he cried. Until the sound of Yosef's crying was heard in the house of Paroi, which the Zohar says, Beisa disperiu v'izgalim b'nei kol nahorim. Paris from the word upara, that means let loose and open up, that it opened up and revealed it from all the lights, k'de'isa b'Zohar al-Pasuk, like it's brought down the Zohar al-Pasuk, adlatz musim musi yizbarach till Hashem's very essence was revealed, which means that it was such a great and awesome revelation, Beis Paroi, that the highest levels were revealed, even the level of Hashem's essence. The Rebbe concludes with a bracha. Yiratzon should be the will of Hashem. Shaydei dibur b'chol inyanim elu. Through speaking about all these matters, niske b'karav Maamar shel kiyum ha'yiyut sheba'aftoira anal. We should merit speedily to the fulfillment of what's foretold in this above mentioned Haftoira b'foil. It should be in actuality. Achibur di Yehuda v'Ephraim, the joining of Yehuda and Ephraim. Ad levahoy achodim b'yadecha, until, like I mentioned before, that there was a miracle Hashem made that Yechezkel Hanavi, when he drew on where he wrote on one piece of wood the name Yehuda, on another piece of wood the name Ephraim, and he put it together. Miraculously, they came together. They joined as one. And to be that David, my servant, will be a leader for them forever. With joy and gladness of heart, take of him Yad Mamish, immediately so.